One of the more recently released plugins that I was really excited about was the Unfairchild plugin from Undertone Audio. And one of the things that was really weird to me is how it made things sound better while it wasn't doing anything. And that's the main reason why I'm interviewing Eric Valentine today, but we're also going to talk about some other things, of course. So, let's get started. Well, thanks a lot for taking your time for joining me today.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. It was very cool to discover your YouTube channel, and it happened through the release of the Unfairchild plugin. You did a review of the plugin, and that's when I discovered your channel. And it's you got a lot going on there. So a lot of episodes, a lot of really incredible information. I was very happy to find it and happy to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. It's interesting though that the first video that I saw from you, and it's so weird how this worked. So back in my audio engineering college, audio engineering school, whatever it's called, I was a big fan of Gives You Hell, like the sound of Gives You Hell.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And I still am, by the way. And so I was looking up, like, okay, who did this and all that kind of stuff. And then I saw your Dave Pensado tour around your studio, if I remember.
Right.
I think it was a Dave Pensado.
Yeah, they had these like Into the Layer episodes, I think.
Yeah, could be. And, on school, you learn rules. You learn like, okay, you have to do this like this and this like this. And I was so in that mindset. Then I saw your video with like the experiments around the drumbrella, was it called?
Yeah, the drumbrella.
And how you covered the console in a certain stuff that was on a microphone to do the acoustics, and like a PCB open next to the hi-hat pedal with a preamp that you were testing. I was like, wow, so you can experiment in like production environments and production studios, because I always liked experimenting, but in some way I was told it's not allowed or something, and I was like, okay. And later on, I of course got an internship at the big studio over here, and the owner here is also a big experimenting person. But it was really like eye-opening to see that. So I also know you from YouTube, basically. So that's that's really cool.
Experimentation has been a huge part of my joy, with my passion for audio. From the very beginning, when we had a little studio in a garage, we would set aside time where people would come in and pay to record at the recording studio. But we also always set aside at least a day or two every week that would be pure experimentation. We called them R&D, which was research and development days. And so we could do whatever we want, just try anything, try the craziest stuff, because often you don't have the time and freedom to do that when somebody is paying you to get something done. And I found that you don't evolve if you're always just using the things you already know every day. And so I've always set aside time to do that. And now my life is almost entirely experimentation, and it's the best.
Oh, I wish I could trade with you. Like,
it's so fun. Every day is just,
I'm usually having these discussions like, I want to close the studio for like 2 months and only do experiments. Like, I want to spend like a month on a snare drum or something. Like, But you know how it goes. Like, you have to be in production, also in my case, video production, because you also have to make money. But I would. It's a good idea maybe to put like 1 day a week in the schedule to just experiment.
It's the best, because ultimately, once you have a discovery, recreating that discovery can happen like that in minutes. But it's the process of figuring out all the things that don't work until you arrive on the thing that's like, whoa, that's incredible sounding. And if you need to pull it out again when you're working with somebody, you can do that in a minute, because you know what it is and you know where to go. Yeah. It's very valuable.
I think if we would circle towards the more musical side of things, every time that somebody was experimental, a new genre has been born, or a new sound has been born that other people will try to copy down the road. I think a good example were the Beatles. There are multiple of them. A more recent one, I think, is Billie Eilish.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so many cool new stuff has been discovered because of experimenting, and I think it should happen more. So everybody that's watching, go and experiment.
Yeah. Well, you have to create an environment that invites it. And the Beatles got that because of their success. They were so hugely successful. They basically had unlimited resources and could take all the time that they wanted if they wanted to. And so they had that opportunity to do it, even in a place like Abbey Road, which was a very sort of structured corporate environment. But you mentioned Billie Eilish, they're making records in their bedroom, her and her brother. And so they don't have a very structured environment. They can do whatever they want, and that's super important. And I tried, even when I was being hired by record companies to make records, I tried to structure my environment, or create an environment for myself that would invite that kind of creativity, where I wasn't billing by the day or by the hour. I would bill for the whole project and say, if you pay me this amount of money, I will deliver you a record that everybody's happy with. But I'm not going to be counting days and hours to keep track of a budget or any of that stuff. I don't want to have to think about that. I want to focus my energy on figuring out how to make the coolest possible record. And that was a great way to invite it into my creative environment.
Yeah, it's actually how I like to work as well, because if I am working on something and I really want to spend some extra time on something just for my own pleasure, I want to be able to do it. So I like to always have fixed rates for the basically just a product that I'm delivering, and this is going to cost you so much. Yeah, that's a great idea. I never really believed in billing by the hour. That's great. Let's circle towards Undertone Audio. How long does that company exist actually now?
It officially got revealed to the world in 2010. That was probably the first time that we were at an AES convention and really, made ourselves publicly known. We had built some consoles before that. The process all started in 2007, just developing the circuitry and designing the amplifiers and all that stuff. And the first console for me got installed in my studio in 2009. And I think at that point we were already starting the process of building a console for somebody else. And then in 2010 is when we, unveiled ourselves to the world. So we've been around for about 14, 15 years, something like that.
And why did you start building consoles, or not?
Well, it's sort of the same, just curious, experimental, adventurous spirit that, permeates everything that that interests me. I was very frustrated with the consoles that were available at the time. And so I was always a Neve person. So I started on, consumer consoles earlier on, like a Tascam and a Sound Workshop. And then, I was lucky enough to get my hands on a Neve 8038. And that particular console was configured to have 32 1081s in it, and then a whole monitor section. It was an amazing sounding console. It was incredible. And, it was like that era of 80 series Neve consoles that everybody, is just, in hindsight, is recognized as being sort of the best of the best for
everybody
them. So,
wants to have it now. Like,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's what was at Sound City and a bunch of amazing, iconic recording studios. And so I had that, and it was great. It was amazing for tracking. It was a little bit limited for mixing. I had two 24-track machines. That's 48 tracks. I only had 32 channels, and that presented a problem when it was time to mix. And so I ended up selling that console. I kept a bunch of the modules, the 1081 modules. I kept those around for tracking, but I sold off the rest of it. And I got a Neve 8128, and so that had 56 channels in it, and it had flying fader automation. And this is all stuff that was important when you were making records on tape machines and consoles. Automation.
I know how it works. Like, I own one.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And it's not so significant now, but it was important then. So I used that console for a long time, and that was the console that was used to mix all the Smash Mouth records. I tracked the Queens of the Stone Age record through that console, a bunch of stuff. Basically, all the stuff in the late 90s and into the 2000s was done on that console. And then that console just got to the end of its lifespan. There was no amount of contact cleaner that was going to keep that thing reliable anymore. And I just couldn't trust it. And I had too many occasions where, I would finish a mix and go, oh, what happened to my tambourine? Like the bus assignment switch was dirty and intermittent, and it just all of a sudden disappeared in my mix, and I didn't notice it until later, And so I got rid of that console, and I got a Neve 88R. It was the most expensive equipment purchase I had ever made in my life.
They still make it, right?
They do, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's an extraordinary console. It does unbelievable, things for scoring and, mixing and making records or whatever. But it just was not a great fit for me. It was physically enormous. Like, it was the size of a bus. It was so huge.
They're also very long, right? You have to reach over the console to get to the last... Yeah.
And that also meant that there was a very long, flat work surface between me and my speakers. And so the reflection off the face of the console became a real issue for me. So I tried with that thing for a few years, and I was so frustrated with it. It just was extremely unsatisfying for me to work on. And there's a point where once you lose your trust and confidence in the equipment that you're using, it's really hard. It's really tough to overcome that. And I got to this place where I just emotionally, I just hated it. And, more than it deserved, because it's a great console. So then there was really nothing out there that was going to do what I wanted to do. And I had access to this amazingly brilliant guy, this guy named Larry Jasper. And he had worked for George Massenburg Labs and Quad 8. He designed consoles for Quad 8. And he just knew everything. It was insane. He was so encyclopedic about all things audio circuitry. And, he was helping maintain my equipment, fixing things and modifying it. He would tell me stuff like, oh, if you change this and that on your Ampex MM1200, it'll sound better. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever, But then we would try it, and it's like, wow, this guy really knows what he's doing. And so with his involvement, I was foolish and confident enough to be like, we should just make our own console. And so we dove in and did it, and it took, 2 years to build the first one. It was a very slow, but at the time, an incredibly interesting process. Like, I learned so much about just the basic principles of audio circuitry that's really incorporated in all the equipment that I use. And it was really informative for me to just have a better understanding about how all of that stuff really works and how to get the most out of any of it. And so that was a really cool process. And we ended up with a console that was extremely unique. The equalizer that we designed, which is now been replicated. There was a rack mount channel strip that we did for a while, and now there's a 500 series EQ version of it. It is an astonishingly powerful parametric EQ. There's really nothing else like it in the world. And so that's really what I wanted in front of me, because, I am a pretty, heavy-handed engineer and mixer. Like, I want to have a lot of control in my hands so I can make the sounds do what I need them to do. And so there are different ways to approach this. There's some people that are a lot more gentle on the, processing side. They put all of their effort on how things are being captured, so they don't have to use really aggressive EQ moves and stuff. I'm sort of at the other end of the spectrum. I certainly do my best to get the sounds as good as I can in the room, but a lot of times I'm not trying to make sounds that are just, accurate and realistic. I'm trying to make sounds that are surreal, that are, beyond realistic, that have a power and impact and energy in them that wasn't in the room. And I have to create it in the control room. And I need a lot of control and power to do that. And this equalizer allowed me to do that. And when we built that first console, all of a sudden I had 60 of them sitting in front of me. And so I didn't have to turn around and go to a rack mount to go to a GML EQ, which was a very powerful parametric EQ, or this old Orban, 8-band parametric EQ that I used to use. It was really incredible, the consoles, when I first got them going. And it was all Class A circuitry, based on, a lot of the classic designs. Larry came up with his own amplifier design, which was really, really incredible. As efficient as a Class AB circuit, but had the sonic signature of a Class A circuit. And so it was all had that single-ended sound to it. So it was an amazing journey, and I learned a ton, and I loved it, and it was awesome. And so then I used, those consoles for like 10 years. And then, as you do in audio, like there's never going to be a thing in audio that I'm just going to use for the rest of my life. Like this is always a journey of discovery. And so now I use a hybrid setup that I love, that I couldn't dream of going back to working on a console. Not a chance. You could never get me to do it.
What I always loved about a console, and that's also the reason why I still have a console in my room. It's not a very it's a Neumann console. That's special about it.
Oh,
but it's
cool.
like 16 channels. It's a very rare one actually, but I really loved it from a workflow perspective, and I still do. Like for instance, when mixing drums, to just have them all in front of you and just not just only the control, but how easy it is to reach everything. I think there's a lot of value in, I call it workflow for that. And
sure.
I think there's also value for having an idea in your head and how quickly you can get it out of your head and into something real. Because otherwise the idea will go away. Like that's one of those creativity things. What is your current setup then? You have a hybrid setup with?
Yes. Yeah. So I use a passive summing mixer. It's started as something that I built custom for myself, and then it became an Undertone product, like most of the stuff that I do.
Yeah.
if it seems useful, then other people might find it useful, then we just make it a product. But yeah, so it's called Pyrisum, and it's a multi-stage bussing passive summing mixer, which was the thing that didn't exist in the market. If somebody was making it, I would have just bought it and started using it, but nobody made this thing. And so that's usually, is the inspiration for a lot of the stuff that Undertone ends up doing is like, I need this thing and it doesn't exist, And so the passive summing mixer that Undertone makes, it has 4 stereo buses in it. And so there's a stereo bus for drums, and then that will fold into a stereo bus for all of the other instruments. So then I can add bass and guitars and keyboards and whatever stuff to that. And then there's a separate vocal bus, and those 2 buses sum together into a final mix bus. It's all done passively, and so I have to use mic preamps to make up the gain. And so often I'll use Undertone preamps for that, which are just big and open and super reliable and consistent and all that stuff. If I want something that's a little bit more modern sounding, often I use stuff that is, very old and vintage. And so that's the other thing that I love about the passive summing mixer. Like, the Undertone console was an amazing. If I was ever going to use an analog console, that certainly would be my first choice. But there is a certain limitation to any console. I ran into this with the Neve consoles as well, that each console has a sound. And if you need something that is contrary to that sound, you just have to use another console. There's really no other way around it. With a passive summing mixer, I'll set that thing up with all Undertone preamps, or I have now this collection of old RCA preamps that I just adore. And so I have an old tube RCA console from the 50s. And when you use those preamps, it sounds like an old RCA console. It's amazing because everything else in that old RCA console is just passive summing networks, and they have gain stages that make up the gain where they need to. And so I'm doing the same thing, just in a more compact and efficient way. And, the parts that actually define the sound of the console are being incorporated into my passive summing mixer. And so if I want it to sound like an old Sun Studios record, I use those preamps. If I want it to sound more modern, then I'll use Neve preamps or the Undertone preamps or something like that. I have Langevin AM16s. They have a sound of their own, which is beautiful and big and energized. And so it's incredibly flexible in that way. I just love it. And the workflow part of it has also been very important to me. And so what I ended up doing is essentially turning my patch bay into a console channel strip with normalization. And so when I'm tracking something, the signal, I actually record things 2 ways now. And so it's normaled, so the mic preamps will go directly into the computer. But the mic preamps can also be multed to go to an additional path that goes through a bunch of 500 series EQs and other rack mount EQs that I have. And that rack is movable in my studio. So it tucks away up in the front of the room when I don't need to grab them. But when I'm tracking, I can pull it out so it's right next to me. And so while I'm tracking, it's a 10 space 500 series rack, and I can just go down the line and just EQ stuff with stuff sitting right next to me when I'm right in front of the speakers. So I do get that same workflow type experience that I would get on a console, just with rack mount EQs. The same thing can happen when I'm mixing. So most of the time, my workflow now is that the mic preamps get captured directly into the computer, and then those signals come back out of the computer and go through this channel strip that is created in my patch bay. And so they'll go through equalizers first, and then I have compressors that are normaled to stuff, all of my outboard compressors. I can use them or bypass them if I want. Then it goes to the inputs of my tape machine, and then out of the tape machine, it goes back into an additional set of converters that get captured back in. And at that point, the stuff is already sort of pre-mixed. And so I get all of my EQ and compression settings. I'll be able to have the time to really get everything exactly the way I want it and capture it back into the computer. So by the time I'm mixing in the computer, I'm mostly just setting pan and level and doing processing that only the computer can do. You know, there's certain things like soothe and, you know, stuff like that. That's, you know, there's no hardware that does that.
So what you're basically doing with your studio right now is basically mold it towards what you need to do. Like you can create it into a more like you have it on wheels. Like it's
exactly
very inspiring.
The rack with the equalizers is on wheels, and I can just roll it so it's right within arm's reach and do all my EQing.
Yeah, and when you don't need it, it's not in the way. And that's of course with a console you cannot reconfigure it because you need to do something else. No,
not unless it's a small one.
Everything has to be on there. Like you can reconfigure it, but it's like too much effort, I think.
Yeah.
Let's talk about tube compressors. The Unfairchild. Like why? Why did you make the Unfairchild in the first place?
Yeah, that was inspired by another really talented gentleman. This guy named Garen Avetisian, and he's a lovely Armenian guy. But he was also, very skilled at servicing the equipment that I had. When you have a recording studio that has a bunch of old stuff in it, you end up having to make friends with all these people that know how to fix it.
I know.
So he was another one of the people that I befriended at a certain point. And obviously, I would pay him to service stuff, but he was also making stuff of his own, and he would show up occasionally with things. Usually they were just like a silver box with a couple of unmarked knobs on it. It's like, Eric, I made this thing, He'd bring it in, and he made great stuff, He had studied all the circuitry for all of the old stuff, whether it was Fairchild or Pultec or Altec or whatever. And so occasionally he brings stuff in, and there was one day he was like, Eric, I made a Fairchild. I want you to hear it. And so he brought this thing over, and he walked in, and it looked like a Fairchild. I was like, dude, what did you made a Fairchild? Like, that's incredible. And so I checked this thing out, and it really sounded cool. So this was probably right around 2010, something like that. 2010, 2011 was when I first saw this thing. And he was using a different tube, a 6BC8 tube, which nobody was making and nobody is making now. And so they were all surplus if you're going to get them. They were super cheap. You could get them for like $1 a piece. And he adapted the circuit to accommodate that tube. And it sounded cool. The 6BC8 is a great Varimu tube. That's the tube that's in, like a UA 176 or 175. Those things use the 6BC8. And the Altec compressors, the 436s, those use 6BC8 tubes. They're great sounding compressors. And so it took advantage of some of the things about the Fairchild design that was really cool. There's a simplicity to the main audio path that's really brilliant in the Fairchild design, and just incorporated a different tube. So it certainly had a different personality than the original. It was like a little bit grabbier and kind of a more aggressive sounding compression, but that was kind of cool, And so we started off making those. I was blown away by it, and he was involved, and so we made an original series of 10 of those that were all hand-wired. We set up my sound room as an assembly floor and put together a team of people, and we built 10 of them. We sold those to, 10 lucky people that have the only ones of those, which are Fairchilds with 6BC8 tubes. And I quickly realized, this is completely unsustainable. First of all, because the tubes are not being made, and the surplus tubes were unreliable at best. And trying to hand wire these things it was a way bigger task than we had anticipated, and it was way too difficult.
I mean,
and so
original Fairchild is already if you look into that, like it's so much.
yeah, they're dauntingly complicated inside.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate part that all the complicated stuff is in the sidechain circuit. The audio path is incredibly simple, and in my opinion, the design of the original sidechain circuit in the Fairchild is not a great design. It's extremely inefficient, and
Yeah, that's true. That's actually it's very inefficient. Yeah,
absurdly overcomplicated. Yeah. Then after those came out and we put those out around that same time, the company JJ started making 6386s. And so we decided, okay, let's restart this and let's redesign this thing to be manufacturable, which means using PCBs and not hand wiring it, and redesigned everything so it would be easy to manufacture, easy to assemble, and easy to service. Like all of those things are super important. And so, the circuit boards are very modular. They all plug together very easily. There are some wiring harnesses, but those can all be done with, a wiring harness setup that is put together. So it was all designed to be much easier to manufacture, and switched the circuitry back to be 6386 and just optimized it a little bit for the JJ tubes, because the JJ tubes are not identical to the original GE 5 stars or whatever version of the early 6386s that you might be find appealing. And so we were off and running. So those ended up coming out. It took a while for us to do that, but that was probably not until like 2014, 2015. It's when the Mark II version of the Unfairchild finally came out. And so that's what it's been ever since. It's just a great sounding circuit, and I always wanted one, but I could never justify the expense. Even at the time when we started this project, like at that time, they were like $30,000 or $40,000. I mean, that's a ridiculous amount of money to spend on one compressor.
Yeah.
And my opinion was that, like, if I'm going to spend 30 or 40 grand on a compressor, it better be the best choice for everything all the time. And it's not. Like, the way the original thing is designed with the 6 presets, it's very limiting. And so there was lots of times where it's like, okay, this is a good preset for vocals, and this is a nice setting for my mix, but it's like, I'd love to use this on drums or other things. And it's like, I can't adjust the attack and release time. I'm not paying $40,000 for a compressor that has 3 presets on it that I like. I'm not doing it. It doesn't make any sense. And it's not hard to add that functionality without altering the essence of what that circuit is. It's all in the sidechain, and instead of selecting a preset, you're just selecting controls that basically where you create your own presets. It's no different. And so that's what was interesting to me, is like, let's have this amazing circuit available more affordably and also have it more useful. So it really could be something that you could use on anything, That was really the motivation for it. And I love that thing. I keep 2 of them in my studio because it is so useful. I end up using it on almost everything. It's, often my first grab. I have some 1176s that I love on everything. And I have the Unfairchilds, and then I still have like distressors that I really love for that more VCA type sound. And, those are always my first sort of go-tos for things,
Yeah. I've never, I've seen them a lot, the Unfairchild. I don't know how many you sold, but they seem to pop up everywhere.
Yeah.
And I unfortunately have never worked with one. Would love to, but I have worked with an original 670 Fairchild. We have one in the room next door. And but maybe that's just because it's a tube compressor. There is some magic around tube compression and tubes in general. There's just something very nice about the sound. But my first interaction with the Unfairchild was with the plugin.
Oh, okay,
So I wanna verify something, and please be honest with me. Like,
sure.
In that video, was I going crazy, or did or does it really do something when it's not compressing?
Oh, sure it does. Yeah,
Oh,
there's a lot of yeah, yeah. There's a
Yeah.
lot of harmonic coloration that's going on. So once the plugin is not bypassed, it is adding harmonic distortion, the same that the hardware would. As soon as you patch through the hardware, it affects the sound for sure.
So you really try to clone the behavior of the hardware, where it runs
Mm-hmm.
through all the tube amplifiers that are on there. So
Yes.
of course it colors. But what I recognized, and this is something like one of the things that we reviewers struggle a little bit with, is doing analysis on compression. It's very like an EQ is very easy, and harmonic distortion is pretty easy to analyze and to value, and you can of course check the the aliasing distortion and all that kind of stuff. It's very easy to measure. But when it comes to compression and limiters and dynamics in general, it starts to get very difficult to get some like unbiased results, to get some like real results that you can compare. It's super difficult. And what I noticed in the Unfairchild is that it sounded way more analog than other clones would sound, and not just other Fairchild clones, but other analog clones in general. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about that without spoiling secrets?
Sure. Yeah. I don't have a huge amount to hide here. And, I did a whole video about the development of that plugin, and I reveal a lot about the process. And so, we took more of an algorithmic approach than the sort of convolution approach, where you're creating mathematic algorithms that are mimicking measured or listened behaviors of the compressor. The thing that's really challenging about compressors is that you were just talking about, being able to try and quantify what they sound like, is the interactions between all of the different characteristics or all of the different functions that a compressor is performing. It seems very simple that you set a threshold, level comes up, it recognizes the level passing the threshold, and then it starts to turn it down based on a ratio. All of that seems very straightforward. But there's a huge amount of interactions that happen between all of that stuff. And what's important about tube compressors is that is the distortion that's added. So it's the things that the compressor is doing wrong is what makes it magical. That it's not just turning things down by the mathematical numbers. Even when you go by the components that are in the circuit of the Fairchild, you can mathematically calculate what that thing will do. And so that's what the theoretical performance is. But what the actual performance, when you put sound through it, ends up not being that. And that's what we're trying to replicate with a plugin. We did a lot of measuring, as much as you can, in all of these different ways, where you're measuring harmonic distortion at all of these different levels. And so there's harmonic distortion that is being generated by just the signal going through the circuit itself without any compression at all. There's also harmonic distortion being generated by it trying to compress as well. And those two harmonic distortions start to interact. And they interact in different ways at different levels or different amounts of compression. Like, it's all changing. And the complexity, it goes up exponentially in a way that gets extremely unmanageable at a certain point. And so the measuring only gets you so far. And of course, we started that way, where you measure the attack and release times, you measure the harmonic distortion at different levels, you measure the harmonic distortion when it's compressing at different amounts, and you come up with the algorithms that are supposed to replicate that. And then you let all the algorithms do their thing and see what you get. And, we did that to start, and I listened to it, and it's like, that doesn't sound like this compressor. So there's something wrong here. And you have to start making changes based on really what you're hearing. And I still believe, in certain contexts, that what I hear is far more sensitive than what can be measured. And in certain ways, there are also things that I can measure that I absolutely couldn't hear. Like, I can see a difference in, a 0.1% in harmonic distortion, and I could see the change in the number, but I don't think I could hear that. So the tools are useful in different contexts. So the measurement tools are very informative in some ways, but they fall apart and don't tell you anything you need to know, and that's when your ears take over. So I spent a lot of time listening to that thing. putting all kinds of different source materials through the plugin and really feeling what it sounds like in the room, and then trying to communicate that to the person that's writing the code and say, hey, this is what's happening. This is the difference that I'm hearing, and we need to try and change this. And for me, it was, having a bit more knowledge about what the Fairchild circuit actually is and what it is doing, and what compressors do, and really understanding circuitry a little bit better maybe than other folks that have gone down this road. It was easier for me to try and target ways to get the result that I wanted, so I could communicate to the plugin developer what I was hearing and what I thought, what changes we could make to get there. And there were some things that were really interesting. I think probably the mistake that most people make is they do the calculations based on the components in the circuitry that are going to give you a specific result, as far as the attack and release times. But because that sidechain circuit is so inefficient on the original Fairchild, what it actually does is not even remotely close to what those theoretical numbers are. And so we started getting, measured results that was revealing that there was some very, very bizarre nonlinear stuff going on in the release of the Unfairchild, and I suspect also probably happens in a real Fairchild as well. I didn't have an opportunity to do this degree of measuring on a real Fairchild when I've had them around. I've done, some tests and comparing of frequency response and things like that when we were developing the Unfairchild, but I went so deep when we were doing the plugin, and so the release time. Or the release shape was very odd on the Unfairchild. So it didn't do just a straight line where the volume would come back up. So, once the circuit is presented with a signal that is above the threshold, it would turn it down. Once the signal goes away, it comes back up. That release curve will either be very linear. You can get a very linear line where it turns up with VCAs, or you can do something that's more logarithmic where it comes up quicker at first and then sort of slows down, or the inverse of that where it starts coming up very slowly and then faster towards the end. So there's different shapes that you can have to your release. Fairchild did this bizarre thing where it had this initial rush of return of signal and then kind of slow down. It was sort of bumpy the way it came back. And so we put a lot of effort into trying to replicate that, and it made a huge difference in just the sort of analog density of the sound. That is the main difference that I hear between that one and some of the other plugin emulations that I hear, where it really sounds like they're just doing, in theory, what a Fairchild circuit does and just leave it at that. Some of the other stuff that was important was that as you get into greater and greater degrees of gain reduction, what the circuit does starts to deviate even further from what it theoretically should be doing, because all of the circuitry is sort of at its limit of what current is available in order to have it do what it's supposed to do. And so when that happens, it starts doing very bizarre nonlinear stuff. And so the end result was, for me, is that when the compression got really heavy, when you start to get into like 15, 20, 25, 30 dB of compression, that both the attack and release time started to sound like they got a lot faster, and they would speed up as it was compressing really, really hard. And I think what's happening is that the sidechain circuit is not capable, when that much signal is being forced through it, it's not capable of generating that curve. And so the initial response is almost like a really fast limiter. And then once it gets back into a range that it can manage, then it starts actually returning based on the curve that the components are supposed to do. And so you get this initial really dense sort of like super fast limiting effect, and then it turns into the normal release curve. And so we had to emulate that as well, which was really challenging to do. It took a lot of experimentation to get the attack and release to speed up when there was more compression going on. And that was when it really started to feel more like a real tube compressor, the combination of those things. When you start to think about how you can arrive at a huge amount of compression, it can happen so many different ways. So you can have a signal that's coming in, you can turn the threshold all the way up, and that can get you there. Or you could have the threshold lower but turn the gain up, and that can get you there. Or you could have an external signal that's super loud, and that could get you there. We couldn't have those behaviors tied to a particular control. We had to design algorithms that would sense what was happening with the combination of how these signals were adding up in order to trigger those changes in the attack and release times, because you can't have it based on a single control. So it was complicated.
It sounds like you've been doing stuff that has never been done before.
It's possible. I don't know what other people have done on other compressors. I was just trying to come up with solutions to get this thing to sound like I wanted it. You know?
I think you've been a very important link in the chain there as well, with your experience with the hardware unit, and knowing what to listen for. A great example that I have, which is the complete opposite, is I've been talking with a plugin developer that made a tape simulation that really doesn't sound like tape. And they wanted to have some examples from my tape machine so that they could listen to it. And I then, they sent me a new demo, and I started explaining them like, hey, but take into account that with a tape machine you also have crosstalk, you have a flutter, you have so many things. I mean, you know it, so many stuff's going on with a tape machine. So I started explaining that, and they were replying to me with like, really? Oh, we never thought about that. We actually never touched the tape machine. And I was like, why do you try to emulate something that you've never used? So I think that the best plugins, like from what I'm seeing right now, are coming from people or have people involved in the development process that actually use the thing and use the thing that they try to emulate. So I think it's a very important link in the chain to have somebody like you involved in the development of a plugin. I'm talking with a lot of different developers, and I rarely hear this type of story. So that's interesting.
Right.
Yeah. I'm also not connected to any brand, so that's the benefit of my channel. You can say everything on here.
Right. My only affiliation is with Undertone, obviously.
Yeah,
but,
of course.
Even with that, there's room for all kinds of great tools and equipment and people making stuff. At the end of the day, I am a slave to whatever sounds good. And so and on my channel, it's like, I use what sounds the best. And if it's Undertone thing, that's great. If it's not, that's great too. And what I care about is trying to get stuff to sound as amazing as possible. And so, I'm really trying to stay away from, having to have any sort of ads or sponsorship or anything like that. I'm interested in the purity of the pursuit of trying to achieve really exceptional sound. And so I'm trying to, create an environment that invites that.
Yeah. The sound and workflow comes first, and like whatever is like from a marketing perspective is involved, like shouldn't even be there. Like,
yeah, I don't want to think about that at all.
What is your most from recent times your most favorite piece of equipment if you would ignore Undertone audio, or like the piece that has surprised you the most from like how it sounds, or do you have something in mind or?
Yeah, I've talked about this a bit recently. It's still relatively new for me because I've only used it on the last couple of projects. But I just mentioned this RCA tube console from the 50s. I think it was built in 1952, 53, somewhere around there. It's an RCA BC2B, and in my opinion, this was sort of the best version of their tube consoles. Immediately after this, the outputs of the mic preamps all went into a summing network because at the time, the way they were imagining it is everything goes through the console, and really the only thing that goes to the outside world is the final bus output. This console still had every single mic preamp channel has an output transformer on it and can be sent out into the outside world, and so without any modification. And so it has 6 mic pre's in it, and it has these 2 bus summing amplifiers in it. And those bus summing amps are just unbelievably magical sounding. It was one of those things that I stumbled onto at a certain point where, as soon as I patched something through this, and I modified it so because this console was originally mono. And
of course. Yeah.
In the 50s, everything was mono.
Yeah.
And so, there was an assignment that you could send, which was like the program output, and that's what would go to either the record lathe or the radio transmitter or whatever you were doing. And then there was another one, which was they called the audition bus, which sent to speakers in the room so you could hear stuff in the room. They were both very similar. The audition bus was class AB, so it would have more power to be able to drive. You could plug a passive speaker directly into the console.
Yeah. Those were the times you could do that. Yeah. They took it into account.
It had its own tube power amp, and it's like the tube power amp is similar to like a Fender guitar amp. It's a pair of 6V6s in there. The Class A one is a single 6V6 for the output. And so I converted the Class A B one to match the Class A one. So now it became a stereo console with 2 Class A tube outputs. And so now I set it up so those are patchable. And so I take the final output of my passive summing mixer and put it through those 2 summing bus amplifiers. And it is just amazing. As soon as I put signal through those things, it's like, God, I'm good at this, It just makes my job so easy. Yeah. It's like, wow, this all of a sudden just sounds like a real recording, Or at least the recordings that I really love, I mean, I'm not super connected to contemporary music. As I get older, my taste in music seems to also be getting older. So I listen to recordings that are mostly from the 50s and 60s now, and they just sound amazing. I love them so much. They're so musical. And so it gets me a lot closer to that. And so every time when that moment comes in the process where I patch that thing in, I'm just like, God, man, it's so good. So
they knew how to build equipment back in the days. Like they really knew how to do it.
Yeah, I mean it's amazing that this console is now it's built in the 50s. It's 70 years old, and it still works amazing. I did replace capacitors and stuff like that, and there are new tubes in it, but it still sounds incredible, and it's built so well. It was designed by real engineers that designed things to be serviced and fixed and maintained and all of that stuff. It's amazing. I don't know. It was a different time.
What would your iPhone look like 70 years from now? Like,
I know all this stuff is worthless, 3 years later.
Yeah. There was much more quality back then, and also serviceability was a thing.
Yeah, they were really making things to last. It wasn't things were not designed to be disposable, the way they are now. It's so sad.
I recently saw a post on Reddit, and like Reddit is a great place to hang out for your mental health when you are a content creator. But it wasn't about me; it was about you actually, and it was a repost of a rant video about speakers and room acoustics and stuff. And I just want to ask you, like, what are you currently using, and what's your current vision on monitoring and acoustics?
The speaker design in particular is an anomaly in the world of professional audio technology, because in my opinion, it's the only part of audio where vintage is definitely not better. When you go back to old speakers, they just sound bad. There's just no 2 ways about it. And modern speakers just sound better. They're more accurate, they're clearer, they're cleaner. The phasing is better. Like everything about it is just better. And so I'm sure there's some people that have fallen in love with some old speakers and are using them, and more power to you. But that's my experience with it. And so I'm using Strauss Electroacoustics. Are the speakers that I've been using. He's a speaker designer that lives and works and has a company in Switzerland. And I really found them by accident. There was a music school in Switzerland, in Basel, called Jazz Campus. It's an amazing school. And they purchased a custom Undertone audio console for their school. And I went there to install the console. And they were using all Strauss electroacoustic speakers. And so I heard them for the first time there. And man, I couldn't believe it. And it was like this, occasionally you'll stumble across something where it's like, the person that designed those speakers wants to hear audio the same way I want to hear audio. And I was just lucky that there's a person out there, as brilliant as he is, that wants to hear the same thing that I want to hear. And he made speakers that do it. And it was so consistent through all of his stuff. So I went out there, and there's this really brilliant engineer, this guy named Daniel Dietweiler, that has a studio out there, and he was an instructor at the school, and he was using the Strauss speakers, and I went to his studio, and he had the large format ones, which is what I have now, and I heard those and just couldn't believe it. I was like, I've never in my life heard large format speakers that are this clear, this detailed, this balanced. I was blown away by those, but they were completely unaffordable. They're really expensive. And so then I heard some of the other ones, and he had these near field monitors that really felt the same way. And you could tell that in his designs, there was a thing that he was going for, and he made sure that the speakers did it, whether they were small speakers, big speakers, medium-sized speakers, whatever. They all do this thing that he wants to hear come out of the speakers. So I ended up getting the small ones, which are really sort of an equivalent of like an NS10 type near-field monitor. They're passive monitors, and they have probably the same amount of level that they can put out as NS10s. The low end reaches a little bit lower. They start to roll off about 50 hertz, and NS10s roll off about 80 hertz. And so those speakers finally replaced my NS10s. And I could not be more grateful just for that alone.
Whenever you start talking about NS10s, you know that you are going to get comments.
Of course, yeah. Hey, and I got nothing against them. I made a lot of records on NS10s, and there is something about them that is very, very useful. They forced me to shape sounds a particular way that really served a lot of what I was doing. But there is a point where there is information you are not getting from those speakers, for sure, that you're just missing out on. And they just don't have that degree of detail, and certainly they don't have the low end, unless you link them to a sub or you have something else in the room that does give you low end to hear. You're missing a whole world down there, And so I used them for a long time, and they served me well. It was great. But there was a certain point where it's like, I just cannot have these speakers clawing at my eardrums anymore. I can't do it. They're so unpleasant at a certain point.
Yeah.
And the Strausses are just like, it's just like an audio massage every time you turn those things on and get to listen to stuff. They're so beautiful sounding, and they're honest. They're not overly hyped. They're very flat and accurate, and they're just silky, beautiful, effortless sounding speakers. I just love them. So after using the near fields for a long time, when I built this new facility in Vermont, I finally had the resources to purchase the big ones, and there was no question I was going to do that. And so I got those, I installed them, and then I went on a long journey. I spent a year because other construction was still being finished in the building, so I had the time to do the acoustics of the control room. And so I spent a year tuning that room.
You did the acoustics yourself?
I did, yeah.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people watching right now that build their own studios and stuff. How would you approach doing your own acoustics? Like, where do you start with something like that?
Yeah, well, for me, the first big discovery was a piece of software called Fuzz Measure. And it was originally built written by just an individual. He had a software company called Super Ultra Mega Groovy. Was his software company?
Great, awesome.
Yeah, gotta love that. And so he maintained it and updated it for a long period of time, and then I think he had to move on at a certain point. And so now the software got bought by the microphone company Rode that bought the software, and so it's part of they have a test microphone, and so you can get the software to pair up with that. And it does basic thing, just a sine wave sweep, and you can put a microphone in the room, and you can see the frequency response at a position in the room. And it was such a revelation for me because, all of the, expectation bias and all of those complications when you're trying to tune a room can get very, very confusing very fast. And so I had so many experiences where I would read something that's like, oh, you can put a bass trap here and it'll fix everything in your room. And so I would build a bass trap and put it in a corner and listen, and you have this expectation and think like, oh my God, it's so much better now. And then after a while working with it, realize this really isn't better. Nothing has really changed. I was just sort of telling myself it did. And with this software, you could at least visually confirm if things are really changing or not. And there are things about what the software is telling you that is not the whole story, because your ears hear things, binaurally in a different way, and we experience things different than a single microphone can hear things. And so there is a limitation there, but if you're aware of that as you're using it, there's a lot of useful information to be gained. And what it allowed me to do is get a reading in the room with whatever its inaccuracies might be, but start incorporating acoustic treatment in the room and just see if it's changing things.
Yeah.
And just to know, is this actually making a difference or not? And you could see extremely minute changes in the room, like tenths of a dB. And so, and I experimented with all kinds of different acoustic treatment. These panels, people will sell panels and they say that they're bass traps, but they're only 4 inches deep of mineral wool.
Yeah.
That is not a bass trap.
No.
By any means,
That should really, that's one of those marketing things that should really stop. I'm starting to get pissed off just by thinking about it.
I know. It's
traps
so
are not
dishonest.
Yeah.
It eliminated all of that confusion and all of that snake oil from my world, where it was like, I could put something up. It's like, that is not changing the low end in my room at all. And so it's not working. And ultimately, the only thing that really made an instantaneous, measurable difference in the frequency response in the room was tube traps. And that really ended up being the thing that was the cure for me. They're very, very easy to build yourself. If you buy them, they're quite expensive. And there are some sort of more sophisticated ways to build them that can increase the efficiency of them a little bit, but in my opinion, not enough to justify the hassle, time, and expense, to incorporate them. The tubes work great by themselves. They come in 3-foot sections, and you can stack them up, glue them together, put fabric on them. You can make them cheaply, quickly, and have lots of them in your room. They're really dummy-proof because they're very broadband in the way they absorb. The diameter and thickness of the walls will focus the absorption at a particular frequency, but it's very broad around that, and so it'll move that to different areas of the low frequency, but every one that you build will be absorbing a lot of low and low mid frequencies. It's really hard to get it wrong, and if you just put a bunch of them in your room, it'll flatten out. On this last build, I tried something that was a bit more technical, and it was on the advice of Jürgen Strauss, the person who makes the speakers. He was advising me on building the studio, and I was happy to have it. He's brilliant, and he's been studying acoustics his entire life. He's just decades deep into this and has access to all kinds of crazy computers and AI modeling and all just insane stuff. And so I did these, on his advice, I did these VPR panels where it's a 4-inch layer of melamine foam and then a steel metal panel, which is a resonant membrane, and then a 2-inch layer of melamine foam on the outside surface, which is really just to keep it so your room doesn't have metal walls in it.
Which is bad reflective for acoustics.
Yes, not great. Not great sounding. And so so I did those and followed the design as precisely as I could and put them up all over the room and on the ceiling. The ones on the ceiling I actually purchased from a company in Germany because those were more complicated to build. So I did all of that. And in theory, those should have been the end of that process for me. But after putting up all of those panels, I still had some huge cancellations in my listening position. And so I had to figure it out and come up with a way to resolve that. And so, I think the VPR panels did do a good job of doing an initial round of absorption in the room, but it wasn't enough to flatten out the low end. From there, I experimented with limp mass absorbers. I did...
Like mine are limp mass.
Okay, yeah. Great.
Yeah.
They ended up not being super successful for me. I did have luck with Helmholtz, bass traps. I made ones that were cylindrical, and so they were very easy to tune. And it just took a lot of experimentation. I learned some very important things, along the way, that the frequency that is canceling out is not necessarily the frequency that you need to address with your absorption. And so that can be very confusing when you're trying to, fix acoustics in a room. And it was the software Room EQ Wizard that has a simulator in there that really helped inform some of the moves that I ended up making. And so the cancellation that I was experiencing in my listening position was the combination of a cancellation between the floor and the ceiling and the front and back walls, and they collided in a way that caused a cancellation at around 50 hertz. The resonances in the room were at 40 hertz and like 57 hertz. And so I made Helmholtz bass traps at 57 hertz and put them up in the corners of the ceilings, and they made a huge difference for that cancellation. That's something I didn't really understand. Initially I was tuning my Helmholtz bass traps to 50 hertz, and they weren't doing anything. It's like, why isn't this working? And so some of these things are really counterintuitive. You think if you have a 50 hertz problem, you should make a 50 hertz bass trap, but that's not really how it works. And so it took me a year to just learn and discover all of that stuff and come up with something that actually worked. There's a whole series of videos about the building of this studio, and then towards the end, there's videos about the acoustic treatment of that control room. And towards the end, I think it's episodes like 27 and 28, you'll find, but you can see the difference of what happened when the room was just the VPR panels, and when I finally finished and I added tons of tube traps and added these Helmholtz bass traps. It's an astonishing difference in the frequency response in the room. The commitment that I made to myself is I want to get this to a place where I wouldn't necessarily have to EQ this room. And I got there. I got to a point where it's like I could totally mix in this room and learn these speakers. Ultimately, the speakers are designed to be very flat, and I like to hear more low end in the room because it's just more exciting and fun to listen to. And so I EQ in a little extra low end because these speakers, you don't have to use subs with them. It's a two-way speaker, a single low frequency driver that goes all the way down to 20 hertz. And man, they throw an incredible amount of sound in the room. They're so amazing. And they're just so tight and so focused because you're not dealing with a sub and multiple speakers. There's just only 2 points where the sound comes from each speaker. And so I ended up in a place that I could not be happier with. I've never had monitoring like this in my entire life. So I don't take mixes out into my car anymore. My car's not going to tell me anything, important that these speakers haven't already told me.
Yeah, and I mean, there's for a lot of people, there's a lot of value to taking the mix to the car or to different speakers or something. But I think what's a good indicator that you have your monitoring setup done well is when taking your mix to your car is only more confusing than clearing things up. Because for me, that's actually also the case. I'm very very spoiled with my monitoring setup, but I do have the same thing. Like I don't even want to listen to it on different devices anymore because I get completely confused. So yeah. So you've been teasing it a little bit throughout this interview already, but you're referring to your videos. Where can people watch them?
Yeah, so that all just changed. For a long time, I've just been putting them up on YouTube, and more recently, I've created a website of my own where I'm going to put the videos up. I still put up highlights videos on YouTube just to let people know that there's a new video available to watch. I'm going to be able to post another one today. And so I made this transition because I want to take this more seriously and take it to another level. And I need help to do that. And so I'm hiring people to help edit videos, and hopefully I'll have somebody that'll be able to respond to people through the website and manage all of that stuff, customize and personalize the experience more, and tie it into a larger vision that I have. So I've created this thing called the Audionaut Institute. And it's just a place to go to learn about audio and share in the passion for recording and recording equipment and just that whole journey. I've sort of progressed to a point in my life where I don't really have the time or desire to immerse myself in these exhaustive, intense album production, projects. Because for me, they were really, really intense, that I'm the type of producer where I like to engineer, I like to produce, I like to mix, and so I'm in that room, 14, 15 hours a day, every day, and sometimes it's 4 or 5 months of that. And it was intense. I'm grateful for the experiences that I've had, but I can't do that anymore. I don't really want to do that anymore.
I understand that so well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I realized at a certain point, it's like, I really enjoy, as we were talking about before, I enjoy the experimentation and the discovery. And I found that, And when you're really doing it in service of a record company or other entities that, they have a specific need of theirs, which is to sell a lot of music to people. And so sometimes that can get in the way of the process of discovery and experimentation. I've redesigned my life to be able to optimize that part of the experience. And so that's what I'm going to be doing. It's an opportunity for me to record some of my own music where I really get to go deep, where it's like, if I want to spend a month on the damn snare drum tone, I will do it, because there's just no reason not to. If I want to do that and it's making me happy, I'll do it. And if there's something to be learned from it, then I'll share it with people,
I want to trade.
And so that's really what it's about, and, I feel like I'm getting away with a lot because it really is my favorite thing to do in the universe, and to just spend time, in this amazing studio that I spent 4 years building. It's definitely the best studio I've ever had access to, and to be able to now start this incredible journey of learning this space and exploring and discovering recording. And there's so many different recording styles and techniques that I'd love to really learn about and try to recreate and just document all of it and be able to share it with people. And, so this platform, it is monetized. That's one of the big differences. I looked into monetizing through YouTube, and at least for me, with the number of subscribers I have and the views that I have, it was a joke. Like, and then I have to have ads on everything that I have no control over. Like, that just seemed really, really uncomfortable for me. I can put anything I want on there on my website for people to watch. I'm still going to be collaborating with artists that I've worked with in the past to feature songs that they've done. And when I do that, whatever income comes in, I will split with them. So any revenue that comes in goes directly to the people that are directly involved with creating the content, which is the way I think it should be. It's really time for that to happen. And,
in general, maybe like
in general, for sure,
monetization on YouTube is indeed it's weird that I'm saying this because it's one of my sources of income, but it's weird. It makes no sense at all, and a lot of people don't really understand that. Like, they all think like, okay, you're posting on YouTube, you're getting a lot of views, you must be making a lot of money, but that's really not the case. Like, it doesn't make that much. So the numbers are pretty, are quite low. So so that it didn't make sense for me. And so far in the transition, a lot of people have been super supportive of this change, and I think understand the benefit of approaching it this way. And I'm hoping that more people will do this, because when the internet first really started to reveal itself as, for what it is, this amazing platform where you can connect with so many people, there was an attitude early on. Everybody was like, oh my God, you can go on the internet and, connect your music with millions or hundreds of millions of people. For a long time, people have sort of been waiting for that to happen. And I think it is finally available now. I'm starting to see artists that are, just recording artists that are now making their own website and starting to release and promote their music directly to their fans through their own website. It's the way it should be. It really is. And so, I'm part of this evolution with the internet and connecting creative people with people who want to experience whatever they create. And hopefully people will be receptive to it. I'm going to do it regardless, because I'm just in my studio screwing around, having a good time, and I'll put it out there. And if people want to watch it, that's great. If they don't, that's fine too. So there's no risk for me. It's all a plus side for me because I'm already doing what I love. So if people want to join me in the experiment, you're welcome to. And so the website is called it's just one word, audionautinstitute.com. You can go there. That's sort of the initial page. And within the Audionaut Institute is the studio itself, so you can go to the webpage for the studio and see what this new studio is that I built. Then there's the Making Records with Eric Valentine part of it, which is where the videos are, all the educational stuff. And then there's Undertone Audio. And so all of those things are really part of this new Audionaut thing that I've created. It's all just, me on this crazy journey, chasing my passion for audio. So that's what it's about. Yeah, really, really cool, really awesome. I'll make sure to link it in the description down below, so you all can just click on it.
Great.
Yeah, I want to thank you again. I want to thank you so much for taking the time for this awesome interview. This has been really great, and a bit inspiring for me as well. Like, I have a few ideas to do and to make videos about now, so that's also really cool. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I feel like we are kindred spirits. I love seeing the tape machine in the background there.
I
And
mean, yeah,
you know,
it's my like. I've been shouting in a few videos that if there ever comes a plugin, because I would love for other people to have access to the sound of a real tape machine. So that's
yeah.
why I'm really enthusiastic about such a plugin. And I've been shouting that I would take it out of my room because I can fill that spot with other stuff because my room isn't
Right.
that big.
Yeah.
But I don't think I will ever sell it. Like I have some kind of an emotional connection with that thing
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
I'm doing the maintenance myself and stuff. So yeah, I just love that machine and I love what it can do to my productions. So yeah. Yeah, it's a thing,
Yeah,
that machine.
we don't use tape machines because they're easy to use. We use them because they sound amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for sharing your incredible passion for all of this audio stuff with everybody. It's a really, really cool channel that you have, and you put out a bunch of amazing information. It's really great.
Thank you so much.
All right, cool. Well, hopefully we'll talk again.
All right. And I want to thank you all for watching this video all the way to the end. I would love to know what you think about this interview, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And as always, thanks a lot for watching, and to everybody that has been supporting my channel, thanks a lot for your support. Keep pushing, and bye-bye.